in transformation programs, there will be difficult decisions that will need to be made. There will be trade-offs that will need to be made. There will be robust conversations which will need to be had amongst that executive team. But everybody needs to be clear on what objective we are trying to achieve, what is the final outcome we are trying to achieve. And I think that can enable better decisions. I think it's just at intersection point where finance is evolving with so much data. And now we have a way to structure the data. Every organization has plethora of structured and unstructured data, but people are not taking direct insights out of it. Where the world is evolving, I think I'm quite excited by that. I think I am definitely excited by how we can leverage the information that we have. We now have tools that can leverage all this information at speed and give insights that we were earlier not even bothered to find out. If I were to put it down to two words, communication and alignment. I think the first thing is you absolutely want to sit down with the entire management and actually discuss what the strategy means for our business as a whole and what does it mean for each of the business units, business unit heads, and all the other supporting functions. I think it's very important we always think that it's implicit and people would understand. And it's not about the cognitive understanding. I think it's the lens we generally tend to have from a finance perspective. Okay, the strategy means that I need to report a bit more. Strategy means that we have to make choices, which means I have to analyze some of the options and what are the options coming up on the table. How do we help that?
Hello and welcome to CFO Forum Australia. I'm your host, Amit Arora. In my day job, I work with CFOs to uncover funds in their cost base and unlock capital for the project they care most about. Today, I have with me Dushyant Kapoor. Dushyant has led CFO roles, remarkable turnarounds, expansion journeys across Australia and New Zealand. Over his 20-year career, Dushyant has worn many hats, from leading value creation at KPMG, advising private equity giants like KKR, Quadrant, and Adamantem, to driving performance and transformation across global enterprises like Cognizant, AMP, Booz & Company, and many others. In this episode, we explore how a modern CFO creates value, not just through numbers, but by segregating signals from the noise and bringing about operational transformation. We also explore emerging power of AI in finance. Welcome to the show, Dushyant.
Thank you, Amit, and thanks for having me on the show.
The pleasure is all ours, Dushyant. You have had a very rich career. Can you walk us through your journey from advising CEOs and private equity firms to advisory firms like KPMG to stepping into operational CFO roles? That's quite a rich career journey. Can you walk us through how did you go about it?
Thank you. Amit, I started my career with KPMG back in India, and thereafter I moved to Australia with my family. And have been in consulting for over 2 decades. Over these 2 decades, I have worked in operations consulting. I have worked most recently in M&A, and I'm leading the value creation team at KPMG. And I've worked across sectors on operational transformations, on financial transformations. I think the main thread that has been in my consulting journey has been I've worked across divisions, across geographies. The main thing has been the eagerness to learn new things, to understand new clients, and to understand their problems. Now, in consulting, if I were to whittle it down to 3 core things or core principles that I've carried through in my current line role. These are, first of all, listen to the root causes, not just the symptoms, and listen carefully. Collaborate with people and utilize data, and don't apply cookie cutter approach to every problem. The problems might seem similar across clients, across industries, but the solution and implementation of the solutions can be very different and should be different, attuned to the client needs. Those have been my core principles, and they have helped me very much throughout my consulting career and more recently in driving transformation in my current company as well. I must say that during my consulting career as well, I have played C-suite roles and GM roles as part of secondments, whether that's part of transformation where there has been a reorganization, or merger and acquisition, where we have either carved out a company and the company is being set up and we need a management uh, to hire a whole new senior management, and I had to play an interim role. These three principles have stood the test of time and helped me quite a bit in my journey.
That's excellent. Help me understand, as you moved into your current operational role, what perspective did consulting in particular give you in an operational CFO role that is helpful?
So I think, as I mentioned, those three sort of principles or the pillars were helpful. I think there are two or three things that helped me with my current role. One is, when you're looking at a performance purely from a P&L perspective, that will tell you a story. However, once you dig into operational parameters, operational metrics, and talking to quite a few people, that helps you understand the overall performance of the business. So rather than coming in straight up and saying, okay, there is direct cost that is quite high, we need to reduce the direct cost, I think we just need to understand what are the reasons for the direct cost being high. What are the drivers? Have the drivers changed over time? I think CFO's role is also one of understanding the signals from the data to understand what is driving these changes before taking a decision. The other thing I would say is, it's an extremely important thing to work with people. Now, as consultants, I think when we are transitioning from junior consultants into managers, into directors, into partners, I think one thing becomes very clear. You've got to work with people, your key stakeholders. You need to understand their drivers and you need to work with them to implement solutions. At heart, all consultants want their projects to be successful. And I think that's where working with people and trying to understand their drivers helps position the solution and craft a solution that will work in a much better manner. It goes to the saying of, do the change with people, not to them. That helped me a lot in my either as seconded roles or in my where I've worked with people across divisions to understand their problems. And when I was trying to formulate solutions, I was actually collaborating with them so they feel part of the solution, not some solution that I have told because I'm sitting at a certain position, so they have to implement it. It's discussing the solution with them, understanding what are the implementation challenges, and then helping them own those solutions so they drive it, because you can't drive all the solution. The third thing is, which helped me quite a lot, is helping people understand the role of finance, which I firmly believe has moved on from being probably producing reports, analyzing numbers, to actually trying to shape up business decisions. And that's where I think there is a bit of an education role on part of the CFO to train their peers in the C-suite on the financials of the organization. They may all know it, but making them understand what are the financial implications of the decisions, offering them constructive challenges and different opinions, whether be it in terms of alternative funding arrangements or differentiating whether we could convert some of the capex into opex or the other way around, or what impact would their decision have on the working capital and hence the business of the company. It's just helping them understand those things helps take much better decisions. And it could come in the form of sitting down with them even when they're procuring services, helping them understand what other practices are there in procurement and how could we maximize our cash flow. Hope that makes sense.
Yes. So how do you go about that? This education part, I understand, is extremely important because finance tends to be extremely technical. Also, finance is assuming a much bigger role than it used to have in the past. How do you cross that hurdle of educating the C-suite and the wider business sometimes of what value you bring to the table, or, kind of giving them a peep into a subject which is so technical?
Yeah, I think it's trying to speak their language before expecting them to speak your language. What I mean by that is, I believe in true finance business partnering. It is sitting down with the chief marketing officer and understanding what their objectives are. What do they want to achieve as a strategy or as a plan throughout the year? What are their constraints? It's then trying to understand what constraints they're working with versus what they want to achieve. Everybody can say, I've got limited budget, and everybody whinges about the budget. But effectively understanding what are the outcomes from a marketing perspective that you want to achieve, and then sitting down with them and saying, what alternative options do we have? Have we explored these? Money is a constraint, but we can deploy money if we can show the ROI. Trying to make them aware of how organizations is looking at ROI, trying to also make them aware of what are the competing priorities and what are the competing demands on the P&L for the money. I think when you start speaking their language, it's that empathetic side they start to understand. It's trying to simplify it for them what you are constrained by and what objectives you want to achieve. So that's point number one. Point number two is, I think, doing a little bit of your homework in understanding from not just from the top management, but from the middle and the junior management, what are the challenges that the organization is facing? And hence, what are the priority areas that you want to spend your time and money on? I think everybody is not aware. It would be a big assumption for anybody in C-suite to think that everybody sitting on the table has an equal understanding of the business and business priorities. They may know the business very well, but what's happening at the ground level? Now, I took it upon myself, one, because I was new into the organization, to actually speak to middle and junior management to understand what are the challenges and hence where do the priorities lie. Once you bring that lens and try to explain to them, most people understand that very well. And they then say, okay, I now understand what constraints you are working with. So let's try to work it together. Now, it may become that you are then sitting down with the chief marketing officer and the COO and yourself. You are probably just enabling that conversation and saying, we've got this pot of money, but we can only spend either this or this. What is going to give us the most benefit? Let's decide as a team, because that's where the joint ownership comes. It's not about operations versus marketing. It's about joint ownership as a business, what we're trying to achieve, and hence what's most important. And I think CFOs, because most things have financial impact, a lot of these things come to the CFOs. I think they are in a very good position to enable those conversations rather than just giving a one-off remark that we don't have money for that.
Yep. No, the way you explained it, I think that framework of having curiosity as the base, working to understand the underlying reasons or the root causes, and then applying not the cookie cutter approach, but custom solutions, bespoke solutions for the business so that it works for them. You brought that to life for us, which is good. Thank you. You've led transformations across diverse industries. You have worked in logistics, financial services. You have worked on private equity portfolios. What common threads have you seen across these diverse industries?
I think if I were to put it down to three or four, I think one would be executive ownership and commitment. You can get people or consultants to design the program for you, for your organization. Eventually, you have to own the transformation program. They may be run by people internally, or there might be a chief transformation officer. But the program is actually, the ownership is with the executive management. They need to own it. They need to run it. They need to be fully committed to it. And they need to be prepared that in transformation programs, there will be difficult decisions that will need to be made. There will be trade-offs that will need to be made. There will be robust conversations which will need to be had amongst that executive team. But everybody needs to be clear on what objective we are trying to achieve here. And I think that can enable better decisions. The other thing is that there will be times when I said there will be difficult decisions to be made. There will be course corrections that will need to be made as we work through the transformation. So I think we should all be ready for that. And ultimately, as they say, the buck stops with the executive management. Now, the second thing is, again, I'll come back to my point about do it with people. If you may have the best design transformation program, you may have the best tools. If your middle and junior management and people at the coalface, they are not bought into it, your transformation will fail. And we've seen it many times. I'm not telling you anything new, but I've seen this firsthand. And I think that starts with the executive management being on the same page. They're then disseminating the same message and bringing their leadership teams on the same page and trying to clarify the vision of the transformation and the objectives and what are the key outcomes that are required from those specific departments and teams to contribute to the overall objective. I think once people become clear, as Simon Sinek says, people buy your why, not what you do. So I think same thing is with the organization. People will do when they buy into why you're doing it, not what you're telling because you are a senior. Because after some time, that doesn't hold true. People will move, and you will lose steam in the organization. The other thing is, I think never underestimate the role of technology and data. I think, yes, it's a business transformation, but technology and data is heavily embedded into each and every process, each and every work, each and every decision. Never underestimate that. It's well and good to say that, yes, I've got my dashboard, but it's a saying about metrics that matter. Are you really measuring the metrics of a business that really matter, that really move the dial, that really help you take a decision or not. And I think never underestimate that. We try to measure the metrics that are produced by deaggregated or disaggregated plumbing. And that's when people lose their confidence on data. So I think never underestimate that. And with the coming of AI, all this will become even more important because the pace of decisions, pace of development will be increased multiple fold. And if your underlying architecture or IT systems, call it plumbing, is not correct, you will not be able to move at a pace that AI can actually help your business to move. So those would be the three things I would say are very critical.
No, that's a very interesting thread, and we'll touch on that. But let me ask you this: what's your core belief that guides your leadership? I think I understood from you that for transformation, the executive ownership is important. Taking people along is important. And you said explaining your why we are doing it is important. Apart from that, apart from those transformations, what are the core beliefs guide your leadership style?
So if I were to look at my role as a CFO, I firmly believe that CFOs these days sit at the intersection or the center of a triangle of finance, analytics, and increasingly AI. Now, AI adoption, I know in enterprises is low, and I'm talking about it, but I can tell you, I've read reports which are publicly available where it is said that the enterprise adoption of AI might be low, but the personal adoption of AI is quite high, which essentially means that people are using AI for their personal tasks. It's just at an enterprise level, and rightly so, because I think we are all concerned about the security of data, privacy of data, and etc. So that adoption is low. But coming back to the point, the CFO is sitting at the center of this. And if you go back to the points I made earlier, it's not just about finance. It's not just about producing report. It's not just about balancing books. It's just not about statutory reports. That is not going away. So CFO is still responsible and accountable for producing the correct set of numbers for the stakeholders being regulators, the shareholders, and the other executive team members and the employees. That responsibility doesn't go away, but the CFO's role is not just about that. The CFO's role is about enabling business decisions based on metrics that really will help inform the key stakeholders about the merit of that decision. Now, they may not just be the financial merits, but financial angle or financial lens will inform the decisions quite significantly. Because if you are going for an inorganic growth phase or even an organic growth phase where you require a lot of capital investment, you will still have a lot of options as to where to deploy capital, how to deploy capital, where is the return on investment. But then if you look at your customer service team, they might want a new system because the customer service system is not great, or they might need new tools to service customers better. On the other hand, your finance team might require a new GL, etc. How to make those trade-off decisions? I think that's where a CFO can provide very good opinions and options. So I think one is that it's not just about finance. It's about analytics. It's about informing, or it's about providing well-informed opinions grounded in data for business to make those trade-off options. So I think that's what I see key. Why I mention AI is because I think AI, in my view, will permeate all functions of the business. However, I feel given where finance sits, it sits on a lot of data, and CFOs generally tend to have access to a lot of information. It's financial data. They also can have access to operational data, payroll data, and everything, and market data. I think they can help form an opinion very easily, and with the help of AI, it will enable production of insights to be much faster and within the bounds of the constraints you put on the AI to enable those decisions. So the decision velocity, in my view, will increase and can increase quite significantly if we leverage the data nicely or appropriately. And I think given the role that CFOs are playing and given the amount of data they sit on, they can leverage this technology quite significantly.
You also mentioned that the adoption of AI itself in organizations is low, but adoption of AI by staff for their tasks is high. And many a times that might be against a policy as well. Doesn't that create more risks rather than?
It does. Absolutely. It does create more risk. However, this is one thing like internet. You can block the websites and all those sorts of things. People will find a way to get on their phones or things like that. What you can put is you can govern that usage through policies and say you cannot put any company data through filters and firewalls, etc. Similarly with AI, because when people use it for their personal uses, be it summarizing data, be it drafting emails or drafting whatever, and this is in personal usage, when they see so much of productivity uplift, it's natural human tendency to use it for their office purposes as well. Yes, you can stop it and you can block it. However, the benefits of this technology in terms of productivity improvements, and I'll come to another point, it's not just productivity improvements. That's based on my experience and based on talking to a number of other peers as well. But even if it just take the productivity improvements, if you allow people to use AI in a governed manner, in a secure and private cloud, and IT folks can talk a lot more eloquently about this, I think you are then enabling the workforce to do their tasks much more efficiently than what they would be doing now, putting enterprise data at risk. It's like if you've got, I won't name vendors, but the most common vendors of cloud services providers will provide you secure cloud. A lot of our enterprise data is on secure cloud in one of those vendors. They're also providing the services to host the data to be used by the LLMs or AI into their secured environment. Now, people can work out how to make sure that the enterprise data never leaves their cloud, but your enterprise data, the most confidential data, is already sitting in that cloud, in your secure cloud. I think if we put appropriate governance and appropriate usage guidelines around what AI can do or what AI should be used to do and which models you are allowed to use or not, and block the others, I think you will see, or we will see, significant increases in productivity. And here's where I'll come to another point where I think with the power of these tools, you can do a lot more things in a lot more detail that you were not able to do earlier because of the speed and the analytical power that these engines provide. If you guide them properly, and that's where the prompt engineering and context engineering, etc., will come in. If you ask them very pointed questions, provide them enough information, they can enable your business workflows quite much. And I think that's what we need to sort of be aware of, keep an open mind towards. There is an education piece there as well. There is absolutely the risk piece there, but that needs to be addressed before we embark on the journey. But this is not a technology, in my view, that we can just sit by the wayside and watch as it evolves and as our competitors reap benefits, and we are then catching up. I think we need to work on it. We need to move on this fast.
So what I heard from you is that there's no point fighting AI. You can't fight it. You can't stop employees from using AI. The solution really is putting together policies and procedures to make sure that the use is compliant and safe for the organization. You also mentioned the vast opportunities that AI has. So there's a lot more transformative potential that AI has for organizations of today. What do you believe today's CFO's role is in terms of that transformation? Do you think they must go beyond finance and act as a transformation partner when it comes to AI?
I think, as we discussed earlier, I'll take a couple of points from there. I think the answer is that the role goes much beyond finance, not to step on anybody's toes, but I think it's to offer challenge, constructive challenge, and opinions. Anybody can challenge opinions and all those sorts of things, but I think the real use of that challenge is when it comes with a solution, when it comes with an option. And I think that's where CFOs can play a very good role, especially the CFOs whose knowledge is grounded in the business and in the data that the business produces and uses. If they have leveraged that data, if they understand their data very well, they can actually partner with different CXOs or even chief transformation officer to help one understand the financial impact. That goes without saying. The second thing is when the benefits drop, how to monitor those benefits and what is the financial impact of those benefits. Is it a one-off benefit? It is a run rate benefit, etc., and how to maximize that benefit. Funding envelopes, and funding envelope is also closely tied to the prioritization of initiatives. So yes, there are interdependencies between initiatives, but one of the key things is how to fund those initiatives. And I think that decision cannot be taken in vacuum. I think that is not a decision just between CFO and the chief transformation officer, but with the broader CXO or C-suite team, where with the relevant and concerned CXOs, where you can collectively decide on the prioritization, keeping in mind what the business needs, what are the outcomes you need, What are the benefits we need? What are the demands of the customer? Is it an employee benefit program? How soon do we need it? And what's the ROI of this? And hence, what are the competing demands on money? How do we fund it? So in asking those questions, you could follow it by 5 whys or whatever. Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to do this? You can do that. But I think CFO can play a much wider role in not just putting a finance angle, but also trying to help others understand what are the financial implications if some of the decisions are not taken, or what could be the alternative approaches.
Can you elaborate a little more on how finance can add value across business, across multiple functions that a business has?
I'll give you couple of examples. I think in one of the projects in mergers and acquisition, M&A project and value creation project in KPMG, we helped a large care provider carve out their business and sell them off. And what we helped them position the business for is to be seen as a complete independent business unit, not just from a financial perspective, but from an operational perspective as well. We applied the lens of if this was not part of the big conglomerate, if this was a smaller business, but independently running business and a robust business, what are the process workflows? What is the process architecture? Again, I'm not talking about organization architecture, process architecture, what's the systems? And I think from a finance perspective, what we provided was, so I worked with my colleagues in operations in KPMG and the client to come up with a number of options of structuring the organization, driving the processes, helping with the selection of systems, what can be cloud-based systems, what could be out-of-the-box systems, what could be customer, bare minimum, what do you need, industry-leading system or industry-leading process, or what could be a fast follower process, eventually keeping in mind what is the ultimate outcome that an organization is giving and what is the ROI we're looking. I think that helped enable a much better decision for the organization for setting it up as an independent business unit. And also demonstrating the value that the business can bring in scaling in a scenario where you want to scale the business quite significantly. They got a much better value out of the business because of that. Another example I can give you I'll just step out. Amit, that was, I think, not so much related to finance, but this next one is. So I'll give this example. So maybe you can edit that one out.
Sure.
But this one could finance, and the next one I'll give from Adamex, although I will not say it.
Yeah.
Okay. Another example of one of the examples I can think of is from my value creation days is where a company approached us. It was a large conglomerate and one of their business units who was sort of out of their core competence and they wanted to sort of carve it out and sell it off because over the years, the strategy had changed and they wanted to sort of sell it off to the appropriate buyer. However, with the current revenue run rate and the EBITDA rate, they were not going to get a very good valuation. So when they approached us, I told them actually to delay their decision of selling off the business from the next 3 to 6 months to about 9 to 12 months, only because they would not get good valuation. It wasn't an answer they were looking for, but they persevered with our journey. So starting with the P&L analysis and balance sheet analysis, we identified the cost drivers, the revenue drivers, and we worked with the colleagues, operations, and other divisions to actually identify the practical levers we could pull in the next 3 to 6 to 9 months to actually improve the EBITDA of the organization, and also without impacting or without having any significant business disruption or without impacting the morale, because it was not about cost cutting or anything of that. It was improving the business efficiency and scaling it up. But that required more than 3 to 6 months to accomplish. To cut a long story short, we put an EBITDA target. We were not able to achieve the EBITDA target in 9 months, but we were well on the journey and we achieved about a 2.5 to 3 million uplift in the EBITDA, which in that industry at a multiple of 5, that gave about somewhere between 12 to 15 million straight to the bottom line in terms of valuation. The client was obviously very happy, but the key message there for the team and for the client was that we started looking just from the numbers perspective. But that's where the finance team expanded well into operations and other areas, obviously brought experts from other areas and drove the right levers to improve the value of the business. Another example I can think of is from my current role, where I have been driving a lot of transformation initiatives. And these initiatives are not just in finance and they are not just finance related. As I mentioned earlier in the talk, I think one of the key responsibilities of the CFO is not to look at just the P&L line item and say why this has increased and this is out of trend. Let's try to reduce this line. I think it was to understand. So it is to understand what are the drivers of that change, of that increased trend, and then how can we address the driver, or look elsewhere if that is a persistent change. And we found direct costs to be trending out of line for a few of our business units, where they were out of line with where they were a year ago or 2 years ago. So instead of just thinking about bringing down the direct cost, we looked at why the direct cost had gone out. And I think it was impacted by some of the economic factors where the employment in those business units had gone down because of some business decisions, and we had to bring in contractors to support the growth. Now, the growth at that time, they weren't sure whether it's going to sustain, but because of the superior service quality, the growth sustained. And then now we are looking at optimizing that direct cost, not bringing it down to the levels 2 years earlier or 1 year earlier, but optimizing it by actually replacing the contractors with the permanent employees, only because we now know that to sustain that growth, first of all, the growth is sustainable, and there is much more opportunity in the business to scale, which will be achieved at a much more optimal cost via permanent employees. Because without looking at that, we could not make a decision whether to bring in permanent employees or not, because they have their own cost. Because if you have to suddenly reduce the permanent employee cost, there are costs associated with that. So nobody was ready to make that decision. So we would have continued the journey of hiring contractors to address the growth, but was not a sustainable strategy.
Yeah. No, I think those are great examples. The first one you talked about was an example where it was finance led. The transformation, the change was finance led, but it included all of the business, the operations, all of the processes. And that's what added that value or valuation to the business. The second example you talked about was how to usually use the financial lens, a multidimensional financial lens, to take decisions. It's not just about getting value, it's also sustainability that needs to be looked at. Now, when you look at these examples, one thing is clear, that there is a strategy piece and then there is an execution piece to it, which involves change, which involves people. I'm not saying getting to strategy is easy, because it is not, but the execution piece itself has its own challenges. So how do you work? What is your approach to working with other C-suite executives to turn strategy into executable change that really occurs and sticks in the organization?
I think if I were to put it down to 2 words, communication and alignment. What I mean by that, when a strategy is delivered by a CEO or global head office, I think everybody can take different cues out of that strategy, of any statement, as we all think differently, we all perceive things differently, or it also is influenced by the division we are sitting in or the lens we are having. I think the first thing is you absolutely want to sit down with the entire management and actually discuss what the strategy means for our business as a whole, and what does it mean for each of the business units, business unit heads, and all the other supporting functions. I think it's very important we always think that it's implicit and people would understand. And it's not about the cognitive understanding. I think it's the lens we generally tend to have from a finance perspective. Okay, the strategy means that I need to report a bit more. No, it's not just that. Strategy means that we have to make choices, which means I have to analyze some of the options and what are the options coming up on the table. How do we help that? Have we got any prior experience in that? Have we got any vendors in that? Et cetera, et cetera. I'm just from a finance perspective. Similarly, from a marketing perspective, if the strategy is to grow, let's say in retail space, does it mean just running campaigns, or does it mean, and what kind of campaigns? Or does it mean reach outs, or does it mean running some schemes? What is that? They can come up with a lot of ideas, but I think if they do it on their own silos, they will come up with a list of things that we need to run some campaigns, we need to run some schemes, we need to run some free schemes or free events, and we need to market here, we need to have TV ads, we need to everything. However, yes, we want to grow in retail space, but we want to grow in retail space for the Gen Z, for example. Gen Z may not actually like TV ads. They may not even watch TV. They may watch only in mobile ads. So a banner ad on mobile will be much more effective. I'm just making a hypothetical situation, but I think it's understanding what this means for everyone. And it's also when a strategy is delivered and we are discussing strategy, I think it's important to hear other people's perspective as to what does it mean for marketing? What does it mean for legal? What does this strategy actually mean for them? Because we don't tend to, I won't say, I think a lot of people don't tend to, or people may not tend to think out of their function They may not actually completely appreciate what it means for a legal division, this new strategy, implementation of new strategy. So I think first is communication of that strategy, which should be clear, and then alignment on what this means for our business and for each of us. And then I think it just means let's decide what outcomes it means for us.
Yes.
What outcomes we'll own, because ultimately it will come down to ownership and measurement.
Yeah.
I think that is what I would put it at.
Okay. You talked about the decision triangle while talking about AI and analytics. Can you elaborate more on that? I'm sorry, while you were talking, I don't know why I thought of the decision triangle, but I was wondering if you can elaborate more on that.
Sure. So when I mentioned decision triangle that CFOs sit in these days is the triangle or intersection, you can say, is between finance. So being completely responsible for finance, the accuracy and completeness of numbers, but also understanding the finances of all the divisions and how they work. I think that's a given for any CFO role or financial controller role. The other part of the intersection is analytics. And I have seen in my consulting journey, call it FP&A or call it analytics team, to be of extremely high maturity, call it 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10, and of extremely low maturity. Now, I'm not telling you anything new, but the point I want to drive is that the decisions that those teams then drive reflect how much rigor there is in the analytics capability in the organization. So I think we need to be aware. It's just like, I've heard it, you would have heard it many times. We are a data rich but inside poor company. I think that is one thing. If I were to put $1 every time I saw that, I would have a big balance. What ends up happening is, one, the decisions are suboptimal. They are not holistic. The second is that proliferates shadow analytics teams. So every division will have one or two people, junior people, just doing analytics for them. But then what ends up happening is that they're doing it in silos. They're doing it just for that team. They're not keeping in mind everybody else. The third thing is, again, I'll go back to, the third intersection point there was AI. What I meant was that CFOs sit on vast troves of data. And this extends not just financial data. They have access to payroll data. They have access to vendor data. They have access to sometimes operational data as well. I think given that, they're in a very unique position to drive wholesome decisions in the business, as I mentioned before. And AI can enable a lot of that. I won't say automate it, but AI can enable analysis of a lot of information in a structured manner and enable that decision making. AI by very nature can help with ambiguous data, can help with predictive analysis, and can help you reason. It's not just like running a RPA or a robotic process automation or a macro to drive a fixed outcome. It's not like the example I give people is an AI tool is not same as a calculator where 2 plus 2 will always be 4 because it's a fixed variable. AI tools are probabilistic machines. Now that's nothing to be scared of because they have their probabilistic models built into that. Most of the times they will be accurate, but there sometimes they get trained on your data and then they perform even better. But what a calculator can't do is it can't tell you if then an analysis if it's outside of numbers. Whereas AI can actually tell you that based on data, your sales increased, but your revenue per unit decreased. Possible reasons could be this. This is not something that a calculator will do. This is what an AI will do. So better leverage that. Having vast amounts of data and analytics being one of the key things that should drive decisions in a company, and CFOs are in a unique position. And they now have the means to draw more insights out of the data, better insights out of data, I think is the key power they hold. And that's why they sit at the intersection of those three things, which have expanded the role and the remit of the CFOs from just running into finance.
So on picking up on that AI thread again, what do you think are the biggest hurdles there? I've heard a lot about possibilities, and it's good. I appreciate that. But what are the biggest challenges there in terms of adoption?
Trust. And there are psychological challenges. What I mean by that is that I think because there's a number of factors that contribute to that. I think there's a lot of commentary on the internet about AI being black boxes and people not knowing how they work. I think we know reasonably well how the probabilistic models work. When people say a black box, I think what they're meaning is that they don't know whether it will produce that out. I think in most times it will produce that output. But because it's a probabilistic model, it's like the quantum theory. You don't know till the time you open the box. whether what's the result is, what's the result of quantum is. I think it's the wrong interpretation to say they are black boxes we don't understand. I think we understand how it works. We can train for specific scenarios. We can train it to help us. I think we just need to be, there's a lot of education piece there. I think ignorance then drives mistrust. And when the other thing, what ends up happening is because it's a shiny toy, there are two scenarios. One, there's a super excited person who really wants to try out AI, but hasn't got or hasn't selected the right use case for AI, which could be solved by simple automation. They might end up not getting 100% of the result all the time, and there might be some hallucinations at times, and that might dissuade them. The other thing could be that their security. What about the security of data? How do they make sure that they are encountering anomalous transactions in credit card list of credit card transactions? The other scenario is that there's a skeptical person who picks up an AI and the right use case is not there, and the AI makes a mistake, and they say, no, this is not the output we were expecting. Or even if you pick up the right use case, because the AI is learning, it might give you a few options and say, no, that's not a very sophisticated result. My people will do a lot better. I think it stands to reason that if AI can do a lot more in medical sciences, if they can do a lot more in insurance, in predicting risks, we are utilizing AI in a number of areas. You pick up the area and people are trying that. We just need to train not just people on the uses of AI or how to use it properly, but also AI on the relevant data. Because otherwise, if you're asking general questions, we'll get a very generic answer. I'm not going back to the garbage in, garbage out, but I'm just saying if you ask, okay, prepare me a plan for today because I am interested in soaking some sun and going to the beach, it'll give me 50 options. But if it knows that I don't like going a certain area, or I prefer beaches in a certain area, and I prefer certain times of the day, it will give me options to do just that. And if AI knows that I like to sort of have a good lunch and then probably relax and have a book, it'll suggest me an itinerary. Have lunch, buy a book from there, and go to the beach and have a relaxing time in wherever. So I think it's, first of all, the framing of it as a black box is incorrect. Two, because there is a bit of ignorance about what are AIs and how do they work. Also, the use cases have not been correct. I think there is the general mistrust. The third thing, obviously, which I'm not disregarding, is the security of data, as to where does the data go when we put it in the model. Is it used to train or not? And there are options. All these frontier models like OpenAI and Google Gemini, etc., they're all giving an option to not use your data for training, but you can also use in your own secure cloud. There are options for that. There are offline models as well. So there's a lot of education piece, I feel, that is missing at the moment. And there is the appropriateness of use cases that is also missing at the moment.
Yeah. So I think what is needed is like a concentrated thought with the goals and strategic priorities in mind, and then designing a system that works, and then kind of communicating it so that trust can be generated. This whole mindset change piece to it as well.
There's absolutely a mindset piece to it. And I think what is helped by is if you have the low hanging fruits, as we call it, and you have some use cases, and there's not one use case that will apply in all organizations. You have to decide, this is a use case for my organization. This is what I want to try. Let's say customer churn. I want a predictable model for a customer churn. Now, it could be done by ML, but if there is unstructured data in terms of Google comments or comments on my website, that can be fed into AI, and it can come up with a predictive model. And over time, the accuracy will increase.
I think that whole opportunity of deriving meaning out of unstructured data, because organizations are sitting on huge volumes of that data, right? And for a long time, that data has been collected but not used, really. I think that's a big opportunity. What are your thoughts on that?
It's absolutely a big opportunity, I think. And that's where I would say that I think that's where the software discipline then needs to come in. Working with structured data, I wouldn't say is easy, is relatively easy. But working with unstructured data, yes, AI can do it for a use case. But once you scale that model, how to turn that unstructured data into structured input for AI to make an accurate prediction or accurate analysis, I think that's where the software engineering principles can come in. I'll give you an example, which I was discussing with a peer of mine, where they have built an AI pilot for understanding anomalous transactions in their AP ledger. And this is, there are certain rules, and they want to predict what kind of transactions we can expect when they open up a new branch, what kind of transactions they can expect, or when they onboard a vendor, what are the parameters of a vendor that can help them predict not just a fraud, but some anomalous transactions. There is one of the key things that they stopped doing is they wanted to do some working capital analysis by putting in the vendor payment terms, etc. Now, the vendor payment terms and vendor contracts are in all sorts of formats. They are in pictures, they're in PDFs, they're in Word documents, they're in Excel, all sorts of formats. Now, that presents a classic opportunity. Even two PDF documents will not be read by OCR properly. So that's the problem they ran into. So scaling that to all the vendors is a challenge that they're trying to solve with OCR. To get all the relevant information about payment terms, ABN, ACN numbers from a bunch of inputs like a PNG file, a doc file, Excel file, a PDF file, or any other format, because it's been collected over years and people have stored it. Sometimes these physical files are gone. They've just been scanned and scanned in any format, right? TIFF format or whatever, depending on the person who was scanning it and what they were feeling about it. I'll choose a TIFF file. So, but once you try to extract information out of it, and that could be light, dark, or whatever, that was a classic use case. And that was a very good one in sense of, yes, you can show the merit of the use case by scanning one or two files. But when you're running into a vendor ledger, a vendor master of 10,000 or 20,000 vendors, with multiple pages, with each vendor contract running into 20 or 30 odd pages, it just becomes difficult.
Yeah. No, I agree. Now, if we were to change gears, Dushyant, if you look, let's say, 3 to 5 years ahead, how do you see the role of the CFO changing or evolving?
I think it will move more towards, the threads I've mentioned before, it will be more business wide, supporting the wider business on decisions, analysis, understanding insights from data. So I think that's definitely one thing that's going to evolve. The second thing, as I mentioned before, I think finance and to an extent operations, the data rich sort of functions, they will be ripe for, let me call it AI adoption in the next year or so, 2 years, whenever people are ready. And we've solved conclusively the privacy problems, which I think everybody is working on. So I think these data rich areas will be appropriate for using that. Now, what happens when you've got a team of 20 people, of which 10 are humans and 10 are AI enabled? I think you need a separate skill set to manage and monitor that. And we are talking of agentic AI and orchestrating with agents and all. So you definitely need skills in the organization, whether those skills sit in finance or the skill sits elsewhere. But I think you need a skill of managing and maintaining these agents on an ongoing. So I think that's going to be important. The third and the final thing, which I would say is about that, call it, if I'll go back to my earlier point, chief signal detector. If I'm not saying that CFO, the role will go away, as I mentioned, accurate financials, complete financials will be the prime responsibility. But I think it's detecting the signals early on to tell the business, given their unique position of sitting on troves of data, will be extremely important. And that's
because the rate of change is increasing, and of course understanding those signals is extremely important. What are the undercurrents and what that means for the strategy, right?
And now that you've got tools to do that at pace, I think it'll become. So I think you will need to evolve. I think this is not just the CFOs, but the whole C-suite will need to adapt to the increased decision velocity. Or I'm not saying you need to take 20 decisions in a day, but taking decisions, and you might require a lot of analytical information to go through and insights to support that. I think that will increase.
So what new skills or the non-obvious skills do you think CFOs would need in the future?
I think you would need people who inherently understand how to ask the right questions of the business. It's not so much hard skill, but a soft skill. And I think that's where we are heading. Because again, I'll take the case of AI, where if you ask the right question, you'll get a very good answer. If you ask a vague question, you'll get a vague answer. And progressing on that path, and we are interrogating data quite a lot. I think we need to ask the question. Even if you take AI out of equation, when a situation is presented to you, which is not strictly financial, but it has financial implications, I think you need to be asking the right questions. So I think business understanding and business analysis would be one of the key skills that you will need to have within the team. That's one. Some sort of an AI understanding. It's not a programming language, but it's understanding of AI tools now What is the skill? Not sure, but it's AI, being AI native or being AI au fait with working with
Savviness.
savviness. Exactly right. Third is managing a mixed and hybrid team. I think it took a long time for people to develop the skills of managing offshore and onshore teams. I think we'll have to, all will move a lot faster, and we'll need to develop managers who are able to manage not just the onshore and offshore teams, but also AI teams. So it's the whole people management skill becomes important, more so because so that people don't end up getting into the box of comparing themselves to AI employees, because AI employees will keep working and human employees are required for a different task, not for a commoditized task. They are required for their unique thinking, etc.
Yeah.
So I think those will be the ones that will be extremely important, I feel.
Okay. And, for the budding finance leaders out there, what would be your single piece of advice you'd give them for moving beyond numbers and to become true builders of capability or true leaders in the finance world?
One skill that I don't think, or one habit that I don't think will change over time, is trying to understand numbers not just from P&L perspective, but from the business perspective. I think that will go a long way in people, in helping finance people understanding the business and speaking their language and trying to understand their constraints and trying to understand their drivers a lot more than just driving the messages from a P&L perspective. I think there are a lot of people who are doing it. But if there is a budding CFO or budding CFOs, I think they will benefit from developing that. And others I've already mentioned, I think people need to adapt to the newer technology, not just AI, but they need to adapt to the paradigm of them being decision enablers and being au fait with analytics a lot more. The tool could be AI, could be Power BI, whatever it is. But they see themselves beyond numbers as enablers of business decisions. I think that will be skill.
And what excites you most about the future of finance? Let me ask you that.
I think it's just that intersection point where finance is evolving with so much data. And now we have a way to structure the data. As you mentioned earlier, every organization has plethora of structured and unstructured data, but people are not taking direct insights out of it. Where the world is evolving, I think I'm quite excited by that. I think I am definitely excited by how we can leverage the information that we have. We now have tools that can leverage all this information at speed and give insights that we were earlier not even bothered to find out. So I'm quite excited that we are finally able to leverage the data, not just past data, but even the troves of data that we will generate to actually enable decisions.
So you see big opportunity there.
Big opportunity. Signals.
Right. Thank you for your time today, Dushyant. It's a very interesting topic. I can go on, but I know you have your work to go back to. I really appreciate the time you spent with us today and the insights you gave us. It was very inspiring and exciting and insightful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was lovely speaking to you. It was very good discussion. Thanks for inviting me again on the podcast, and I look forward to hearing the other interesting speakers you bring on the show. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.